So many of you have probably seen this before, and I can't disagree with you all. This is absolutely beautiful, absolutely beautiful to watch. Uh, Purkiss, I hope that's how you pronounce his second name, did an absolutely fantastic job, absolutely dismantling not only Jacob Rees-Mogg, but calling out the absolute nonsense that the culture wars really are. This is why I've said before, I don't bother with this culture war nonsense or people crying about being cancelled, because in reality, there are far, far bigger issues going on that the British public want, like, people in the government to be taken care of. And this is why they're trying to import the culture wars from America, and it isn't working. Luckily, it's not gaining the kind of traction that they want it to, because if they did, it could be a fantastic smokescreen for them to try and hide essentially behind 13 years of Tory failure. And Purkiss here does an absolutely fantastic job, calls out the nonsense, and then starts to take Mogg to task for all the failings of not only him, but his government has done for the past 13 years. It was an absolutely fantastic interview. However, I cannot say that, some of the stuff I would have maybe done slightly differently, but that's only coming from me. And I don't want to say that, she didn't do a good job. Bear in mind, this is a bit of sort of criticism. I've said before, I do sort of this like media PR and sort of prepare people to sort of go on interviews. And of course, preparing people for what might be a conflicting or like, explosive interview is a bit of stuff that I've sort of been involved with in the past, preparing people for these types of potential interviews. So we're going to go into this and have a look at how this was absolutely beautiful, where Purkiss could have maybe called out Rees-Mogg sort of a bit more in other areas. But I understand this is a live environment. This is highly stressful. And like I say, she went hard. And trust me, that is a tactic, and it has its pros and cons. The pro being she absolutely wrecked Jacob Rees-Mogg. The con being that everyone in, shall we say, the aftermath of this interview, everyone was a conservative who, rather than focus on the facts that she brought up, these 13 years of Tory failure, and Mogg could basically say nothing in response to these failings, rather has now focused on the fact that, oh, Purkiss was being a bit of a bully. She was being too mad, and gets to instead focus on that rather than the actual criticisms that she brought up. There is a lot to be said about civility, and I know that will upset a lot of people, me sort of saying that, but like I say, if you go hard, go hard. Like I say, she went hard, and I think we got an absolutely fantastic, brutal destruction of Jacob Rees-Mogg. And of course, you had all the conservative sort of politisphere complaining about it and saying that she was bullying him and all this other stuff, which is, it's nonsense. Like I say, this is valid criticism that she was bringing up to Mogg. And there's a ton of stuff I think she'd have gone harder on, but there you go. So before we sort of do go into this and have a look at this, bear in mind, this is criticism, as I've said before, as a matter of hindsight, the fact that we can sort of pause and stop it. Would I have done as well as Purkiss in this type of media environment? Who knows? Like I say, the live sort of TV studio environment is one of very, very high pressure. And she did absolutely fantastic. And I don't want to say at all that she did not do an absolutely fantastic job here. She did. It's just that doing a bit of what I've done in the past and whatever, this might be helpful for potentially anyone else out there who might sort of re-look at this interview, maybe find this video, and then maybe take on some tips, maybe from me in the future, that goes on to absolutely destroy a future Conservative politician like Jacob Rees-Mogg or whoever else. So it's a bit of a public service, but there you go. So as always, like I say, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. So please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. There's also down below my Patreon page, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. There's the YouTube thank you button. And of course, there is the Pony Club down below as well. So let's go over to this and have a look at this. So here's the thing. Whenever you are brought into these types of studios, they will always tell you why we're bringing you in. So the why they brought in Purkiss here was they wanted someone from the left who they would at least hopefully be able to show, oh, look at this crazy lefty nonsense talking about the culture wars, and Mogg could sort of duel and spar with her on his sort of familiar ground, and of course he can sort of regurgitate all the you know the right-wing talking points about all the free speech nonsense. But what Purkiss does is she does what I would call a flip, where the interview is meant to be about one thing and you flip the interview so that it now becomes about something else, because Mogg here absolutely lost control of this interview and Purkiss took control of it. And I think, again, she did an absolutely fantastic job. And we will point out at what point Mogg lost control of this interview. And to be honest, the people in the gallery should have been going like this, desperately end this interview now, get this over with quickly, Jacob, for God's sakes, end it now. But for some reason, they let this continue. And they even then decided to upload the full clip as something to their YouTube channel. Like I say, this clip does not make Jacob Rees-Mogg look good. It makes him look really, really bad. So, anyway, let's go diving into this and see what happened when Mogg met Purkiss. So, no, oh, hang on a second. Let me just make sure that there we go. So, there we go. I absolutely agree with these Oxford Union students. If they want to stop someone from talking or someone speaking on their campus, that is their right to do so. That is them exercising their free speech to do so. And if they get this person to not speak at their campus, excellent, because they can make a case, as they are making here, that she is spouting stuff that would be harmful to other members of that campus. That is something well within their right to do. And then if this person wanted to have their own event, maybe off campus, maybe invite those people who should be debating off campus, then yeah, any venue that wanted to host her, fair enough, they could go and have host. She hasn't really lost her freedom of speech. The person who they're inviting, as Mogg has stated, she's a big philosopher. I very much doubt she has lost her freedom of speech. But of course, you've got to remember, this is the nonsense cancel culture culture wars, where the right are currently trying to sort of fight it. And of course, as I've said before, this is why we don't cover it, because it's a load of nonsense. It's a load of smokescreen nonsense. And like I say, Purkiss does here get to the heart of the issue. So let's continue, shall we?
I was an officer when I attended the university, and I'm now a trustee of the parent charity. So I'm delighted that the Oxford Union is sticking to its guns, because Ms. Stock isn't a hateful person. She has merely expressed scepticism about gender ideology. But I'm now joined.
Okay, again, you notice doesn't actually express what she said. And to be honest, I don't really want to bother looking at what she's said either, because most of the time when these people are expressing skepticism, it goes far beyond the realms of skepticism. And I've said, the Oxford Union students have said, look, the stuff that she's said is transphobic and would be harmful to people who are on our campus who are of that persuasion. Why should we allow someone like that on our campus? It is every right of those students to express that view. That is them expressing their freedom of speech. Now, what the real heart of all this comes down to, and this would be the alternate version of what you could say if you're ever in this situation and this is sort of brought up to you. What you should be bringing up instead is the fact that, look, these Oxford students have every right to express their freedom of speech to do so, because the right does this exactly the same to people on the left. Bear in mind, this is not too long, of course, after we found out that Jacob Rees-Mogg himself has blacklisted certain speakers, certain experts from coming in to the House of Commons because they have criticised his government. After all, isn't that something very similar that suddenly Jacob and these Oxford Union students have in common? So what's the difference, Jacob? But I think that story, I don't know. I say I don't. When was this sort of broadcast? Would this have been out 1 day ago? I don't know if that would have been out. And of course, I don't expect Purkiss to be for sort of fully knowledgeable of everything that's going on in the world. And of course, when you go into these types of sort of interviews, I think you should have a strategy. And she very clearly did have a strategy, which is basically say, look, all this culture war stuff is nonsense. It's a smokescreen behind essentially what is 13 years of failure of your government. This is why you're trying to sort of bring up this culture war nonsense and fight it, because you've got nothing else to run a general election on. That was, I think, what her strategy was. Like I say, no problem. I think that was a good strategy to go with. It's one I would probably advocate if someone was to do this as well. That would be a good way to go. But again, since you've got Jacob Rees-Mogg and that particular story as well, so that would be certainly something else to sort of sting Mogg with as well. Why then, if he disagrees with these Oxford Union students trying to deplatform someone, why is he then deplatforming people coming into the House of Commons who have criticised his government? Again, it's just another strategy you could sort of go with on this. And like I say, I think her strategy going in, very valid as well.
By the political commentator, Marina Purkiss, who, as I understand it, Marina, you don't think the cultural wars really exist? You think they're essentially a right-wing...
Oh, no, I think they exist because people like you and your party in government, they desperately need them to exist, because what else are you going to win the next election on?
No notes. No notes at all. Yeah, like I say, that was her strategy, to go in and just say, yeah, these culture war stuff, yeah, they don't exist in the way that the right wing say they exist, but they do exist in the fact that this is what the right wing has to try and bring up, because they've got basically a record of over 13 years of absolute non-stop failure. And like I say, like she said there, what else are you going to run the next general election on? Now, I think what she should have done there, and bear in mind, this is, again, criticism of hindsight. I understand live studio like this, very, very intimidating, very, very much under pressure. You've got to be able to sort of really sort of quick think on your feet. And again, we are watching this with the benefit of hindsight. But I think if you're going to go in that, and that is your potential opening statement, you've got to go, she should have gone, well, you can't fight on immigration, you can't fight on the economy, you can't fight on law and order. And you just list off their failures, just one after another. And then just finish off by saying the only thing you can fight on now is trying to invent culture wars as a smokescreen to try and hide your failure on all those topics and subjects. Now, again, like I say, I think she did a fantastic job. That is a fantastic opener. But I think certainly if you want to sort of go down that direction, trying to highlight more Tory failures, and certainly stuff that Jacob Rees-Mogg has voted for, I think if you know you're going to go up against someone like Mogg, then his voting record is fully open. You should look at all the things he's voted for and against and just take him to task on all of it. I mean, I think she later on does go after him for the new protest law. And I think someone who is like Mogg, who's being a massive hypocrite here, voting for the protest laws, which are and do directly affect people's freedom of speech, massively hypocritical for him going for stuff like that. And again, she does call him out for that, which is again good for her. That's a good way to go for it.
So they're not coming from people who want to pull roads down or want to edit Roald Dahl. Isn't there a battle of ideas that is going on that sometimes get expressed in extreme form?
So what I think's
here we are. This is it. The question there was, people just aren't civil enough. If you really break that question down, is that people just aren't civil enough when they're discussing these ideas. And someone seriously says in the comments down below about the fact that there was a video long ago of someone debating Enoch Powell and weren't they so civil with each other? If Enoch Powell was around today with the kind of stuff that he was saying, there would be no way in question that he would not be facing the exact same kind of stuff, and he would retreat to the exact same culture war nonsense, saying, "Oh no, you don't understand. I'm just trying to have a civil debate about all these ideas, but these people don't want to engage with me in a civil fashion." And bear in mind, Purkiss is about to go hard on Mogg. And as we said, in the aftermath of this, what have you seen? People accused her of, she was bullying Jacob Rees-Mogg. She was being too mean to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Purkiss just needs to be more civil. Well, this is the type of stuff that you see. And bear in mind, I guarantee you, there are going to be a lot of right-wing pundits online. They're going to be desperate to try and get Purkiss on their show. They're not going to be civil with her at all. They will try to rile her up, get her to attack them. Then they go, "Oh yeah, see, I invited Purkiss on to into the civil debate, and look, she turned around and attacked me." Meanwhile, they'd been sort of egging her on, asking her sort of provoking questions. It wouldn't surprise me if she's had those offers. Would not surprise me at all if she's had those offers from those people. Certainly in the sort of right-wing online blogosphere. But yeah, that is essentially what that question is. It's, people just aren't civil anymore. No, these protests like this have been going on for so long. You can go back in time to the 2000s, to the noughties, to the 90s, and you can see these exact same types of protest going on. The thing is now is that because of things like soft social media and things like that, people are now held to account more for what they say. And the thing is, these people like Mogg and everyone else suddenly are now having to be held accountable for the things they say. And they don't like being held to account because normally back in, pre-social media times, they could say whatever they want and then they didn't have to hear the backlash. But now sort of social media exists. They hear the backlash, they see the backlash, and they don't like the fact that they're being held to account for what they've said. And then, of course, this becomes, oh, these people are just so uncivil. So this is basically just a question about why aren't people civil in this modern day and age?
Happened is it's a distraction technique. So don't get me wrong, I think any calls to rewrite Roald Dahl, for example, or to rename a street, by the way, the street renaming, if we go into that, it was called Black Boy Lane. You know, that was why they renamed the street. I think that's fair enough. If you had a street named, you know, White Trash, you might want to rename it.
So that's good. Because if you're, again, as she's going in, making the argument that all these culture war arguments are just a load of nonsense, pointing out just how load of nonsense they are, yeah, you need to point some out. So she's already sort of fulfilled those. And now, of course, you've addressed that, getting on with sort of a main point that this is nothing but a big smokescreen to try and hide their failures because they've got nothing else to run on.
But I think what's happening here is you're drawing attention to these things that actually don't impact people's lives. And the reason you're doing that is because otherwise people might just focus on the real grievances in their life, which are basically caused by your government.
But doesn't no platform...
Bang. Bang. And Jacob Rees Mogg is desperate to try and drag this and at least keep this on a culture war footing. And to be honest, he's about in a moment to completely lose control of the interview. And I want to sort of really praise Purkiss of how she's really taken this and the attitude that she's sort of done this in a sort of tone and a sort of language. Now she's about to, as we said, go hard on him. You can even see from the direction his head, she's gone, you know, answer that question, Jacob. You've got a litanies of failures that aren't really that are sort of more important to the people of the UK, but you're trying to say that this culture war nonsense is far more important. So this is the point where Mogg, in a few moments' time, is about to completely lose control of this interview. And his only response is, "Oh, but aren't we sort of trying to, you know, we're just trying to protect their freedom of speech." Well, Purkiss has an answer for that as well, as we'll see in a moment.
Platforming actually affect people's lives because freedom of speech is absolutely essential for the political discussion that we're going to have.
Jacob, but do you know what really impacts people's lives? And I really would just ask your viewers, just you probably dislike me if you know who I am, but just ask your viewers to think about what really impacts their life. Is it Roald Dahl being rewritten, which, by the way, I don't think it should be? Is it the renaming of a street? Is it, I don't know, some woke policy? Is that really what's harming people? Or is it the concern that they are going to be waiting for an ambulance and dying?
Again, like I say, this was a strategy going into it. This is what her strategy was all this culture war stuff is nonsense. In reality, all this stuff that's going on, like I say, people dying while waiting for an ambulance, that's far more people's concern. And she is this is the moment where Mogg has lost this interview. He's lost the argument. He's lost it, but he's still going to try and sort of keep it on culture war stuff. But Purkiss here. Oh, sorry, Purkiss. Sorry, I'm terrible at remembering second names. I'm terribly sorry if you ever see this. But yeah, she does an absolutely fantastic job of just dragging him back, saying, "You're saying culture war stuff is important, but actually, there's all this other stuff going on which you're not addressing, and your party is ultimately responsible for, which affects people's lives far more, rather than this perceived attack on people's freedom of speech." Again, it's an absolutely fantastic strategy, of course, to go down. Like I say, it was absolutely the right call to go on that. That's an absolute true one.
Is it the concern that their children are getting a poor education? Is it the concern that we've got the highest energy bills on the planet?
But isn't this why you should stand up for freedom of speech? Because if you attack freedom of speech in some areas, you're then putting the government in control of the agenda. You're deciding politicians should.
So this is sort of a good and bad point here, because a big point here is, and there is an argument obviously to be made about civility politics and trying to reach out to the audience on GB News, and certainly any of sort of Jacob's fans. And I don't think she really cared about maybe reaching out to those fans, because like I say, she goes hard and just says, no, look, audience, your problems are, there's big problems in the NHS. We've got the highest, cost of living, energy. And then Jacob's answer is, oh, but if you take away their freedom of speech, well, hold on. We're having all these problems and people are constantly talking about them, but you're not listening to them. And I think this is a criticism of hindsight, and I will fully admit this is a criticism of hindsight. My response to that question would have been, people are talking about that. They are suffering from all the stuff that I've mentioned, but your government isn't listening to them. You are not supporting the people you purport that you are apparently so caring about when it comes to their freedom of speech. And of course, this is a good point as she brings up the point that Mogg voted for the recent sort of protest law, which does affect people's freedom of speech.
Mr. Freedom of Speech here, did you or did you not vote to stop people protesting if it was annoying?
Well, there are limits on protest, but
so
public
free
protest
speech, so long as I'm okay with it.
No, public protest is a very important part of freedom of speech, and the laws that have been introduced are to get the balance right between people going about their daily lives. That's perfectly reasonable.
You tell me how freedom of speech is going to make people's lives better in this country.
And that's another point where she goes after him for it, because this freedom of speech, we already have freedom of speech. This idea that, people are losing their freedom of speech. No. People are now having to face consequences more for what they said than they did in the past. Partly because, again, of the internet, sort of social media. But again, pointing out what would have really been, this is another benefit of hindsight. She could have gone, how does freedom of speech put food on someone's table? Or how does freedom of speech improve, put money in someone's pocket? Now, I think she said, how does freedom of speech, hang on, we'll just go back to this, because I want to make sure that I've got it right.
That's perfectly reasonable.
You tell me how freedom of speech is going to make people's lives better in this country.
That is true. That is a very good one. But again, benefit of hindsight here. I think she should have gone, how does freedom of speech, again, no, how would someone's freedom of speech improve their lives if they're in the queue for a food bank? And after all, they've gone up dramatically under 13 years of Tory rule. Now, again, benefit of hindsight, we get the opportunity to sort of watch it back. And again, a live studio environment like this is very, very high pressure. You get one chance. So I am not criticizing her for that. It's just in the heat of the moment, she did very well. That's a very, very good attack on Mogg for why is this freedom of speech so important when so much other is affecting stuff. I think that maybe trying to sort of connect it more to, that would have been a good one. How could freedom of speech heated someone's home? you know, there's a ton of stuff you could have really just said, but I think what she could have done there, instead of improve someone's life, try to connect it to like the fact that, you know, the rise in food banks, or again the cost of energy crisis, which again she mentioned. She could, I think that would have been the thing. How does freedom of speech keep someone warm this winter? that would have been, you know, she's already, to be honest, she's already metaphorically got Mogg bent over the table and just absolutely spanking him, calling for Nanny to help. But yeah, this is the moment where Mogg has lost control of the interview, and Purkiss pretty much takes over completely from this point on.
After it's been decimated by things like your Brexit.
Because it's really important, because it allows you to come on this programme and make your case.
So this is the point where I think you could have just made Mogg look even more ridiculous. Just focus on the fact that he is so obsessed with someone's freedom of speech, but in reality, this does nothing to help someone who is in a food bank, who has massive energy bills, who is suffering from the problem of inflation. And this, I think, would fit her narrative of what she wanted a lot more. And she did bring up Brexit. She's, again, fine, valid criticism. And of course, I am a channel that talks a lot about the problems of Brexit. But I think at this moment, because you've got him literally on the hook, mentioning Brexit gives him a bit of wiggle room. So I think she should have just entirely focused on the fact that Mogg trying to say that freedom of speech. God, could you imagine if she'd have got Mogg to say that freedom of speech helps put food on the table, or someone's freedom of speech can help them heat their house? That would have been hilarious for Jacob Rees-Mogg, if she could have tried to admit Jacob Rees-Mogg to say something like that. Anyway, let's rewind it a couple of minutes, but there.
Your Brexit.
Because it's really important, because it allows you to come on this programme and make your case. And that once you...
Sorry, me making my case on this programme,
yes,
which I will never come back on,
okay,
is just so that people understand that this is not going to help them. Freedom of speech is not going to help you pay your bills. It's not going to put food on the table. It's not going to feed your kids.
But it allows you to...
Yeah, again, like I say, I think going on that, perfectly true. And now Mogg's going, oh, but it allows you to sort of bring these up. She could just turn around and just say, Jacob, I'm a big political commentator and journalist. I don't really need this platform. I've already got freedom of speech. I do not need to come on here, because I've already got my own platform that I can speak to. That, I think, that would have taken it. Now, obviously, here she's really good. She's already said, "Oh, I'm on here. I'm not going to come here again." Again, don't really need to say that, bring it up. But again, you've got to be careful of civility politics, because this is what the right, in sort of response to this and trying to defend Jacob Rees-Mogg. I'm sure our favourite boy over at Conservative Home, will be probably writing a defence piece in the name of Jacob Rees-Mogg, calling Purkiss a bully, and she was really uncivil in this conversation. And Jacob Rees-Mogg is right, because this is about a battle of ideas, and these people are just too extreme to be really discussing these really key and crucial ideas like freedom of speech. I'm sure that's what Will is going to write, something along those lines. I haven't even seen it yet, but I already know he's already probably furiously typing away, trying to defend his buddy and, of course, fellow podcast host on the podcast, Jacob Rees-Mogg. It wouldn't surprise me if they're doing a podcast episode about it, but hey, well, yeah.
Make the argument that you're making.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
So fundamentally
All
important.
I'm here to do is to draw attention to the fact that what you do
Yes, but that is freedom of speech.
It's fraud.
So it's really important to defend freedom of speech and protect it.
Your freedom of speech, all you do is you use your platform. I can't believe you do this. Like, you were born into a life of privilege, Jacob, and you decided to be a con man, to lie to people who trust
I use my platform so that people like you have freedom of speech too, because I think it's really important.
I don't need
Again, it's sort of, I agree with the tactic. You know, she's going to go hard because that's the decision she decided to take. But again, this sort of turns off people who are on Mogg's side, or it gives conservatives ammunition to fire back. Oh, she called Jacob Rees-Mogg a con man. You know, how dare she? And again, it gives them the opportunity to not really address the stuff that she's saying. Gives them a get out clause because they get to focus on the fact that, oh, she called Jacob Rees-Mogg a con man. So there is a lot to be said when you're in this environment about not calling people names. And don't get me wrong, I agree with what she's saying, but you've got to be really careful because obviously this turns people off from these types of conversations. And again, it gives people a massive get out clause because then they don't really have to address her argument. The fact that, you know, how is freedom of speech going to help someone who again last winter didn't have the heating on and was, you know, having to wear like 3 or 4 layers of clothes just to keep warm? How are they going to keep warm this winter? You know, that's where I think she should have focused on. Just the fact, and just keep on showing people all this nonsense, all his arguments for freedom of speech do nothing to try and sort of help people, the people who he claims he's trying to help, you know, improve their lives. And again, I can say, in these types of shows and environments, you've got a very, very quick, very, very short amount of time sometimes to sort of get there, make your point, and get it across. It's a very high pressure environment. Trust me, when you're under those studio lights, the heat does get to you, does make you sort of a lot more sort of prone to be sort of forgetfulness. And trust me, being in front of those cameras, it can be a very weird environment if you've never been in sort of one before. It can make people a lot very, very, very nervous in that type of environment because if you've never been there before, if you're not used to it, it can throw you off your game completely. So yeah, I would completely sort of agree with what she said here. I think her tactics, her way, and the direction that she's directing this is fantastic. I think she should have kept it on the point of, you're trying to say freedom of speech is so important, but there's all these other issues that are affecting people's lives, and freedom of speech is not going to help these people's lives because they're already protesting. They're already speaking up, but Jacob Rees-Mogg is not listening. And I think that was the missed opportunity in this conversation, that she didn't bring up the fact that Jacob Rees-Mogg is not bringing, or is Jacob Rees-Mogg going to bring in someone who is protesting about all these high energy prices? Is she going to bring in someone who is bring about the sort of the cost of living crisis? No, Rees Mogg's not going to bring anyone like that in. But again, Mr. Free Speech only really wants to talk to people who he thinks would be either sort of a really weak and easy conversation, or if he can, you know, drag it off the sort of the rails. I mean, he's desperately trying to keep it on the culture war stuff, and Purkiss is doing a fantastic job in saying, yeah, this is just all nonsense. And I think that's what she sort of really should have kept it to, that laser sort of fine focus, because there is a lot to be said about repetition when it comes to sort of these types of arguments, and especially when you've only got such a short amount of time drilling in that point that Mogg is making arguments about free speech that he cannot really back or substantiate, and make him look just completely foolish. Yeah, I think that would have been a good, but like I say, she did a fantastic job. And like I say, bear in mind, these are very much comments from that I'm making some sort of hindsight. The fact I can stop and pause this video and sort of, think about some of these ideas. So bear that in mind.
I need you to defend
you
my
can
freedom
make
of
your
speech.
make your
I need
case.
you to be in a position of
But the
government.
left don't
You are
like this, do they?
Stop.
That's
I don't
why.
care. I'm not even,
That's
I didn't
why.
even realise
That's
I
why
was on the
people.
left, Jacob.
That's why people are
I
trying to
didn't even
stop
realise I was on the
this
left.
lady
I just
going to the Oxford
realised.
Union.
I just realised I was a decent person, not some massive lefty. I just realised what you lot are doing in government is disgusting. And you lie and you lie, and you've got no contrition for what you've done to people. Your Brexit. Do you care?
Well, people voted for Brexit. That's democracy.
Of course they.
Again, I wouldn't have brought Brexit up into this conversation because, again, I think it opens a lot more avenues for Mogg to sort of run away from and sort of give him opportunities to wriggle off the hook. I think if she'd have gone for the fact kept on the cost of living crisis, that would have been a far better thing. So again, if she wanted to go after Mogg, I think yes, but I think this gave him too many avenues to sort of maybe wriggle off the hook. Don't worry, she still absolutely destroyed him in this conversation, but bear in mind, as I said before, this is sort of a look at the bigger sort of conversation. And potentially, if anyone ever sees this video in the future, maybe some avenues to look at. And of course, if you are going to bring in something like Brexit, how then can you sort of tie it back into sort of arguments that your free speech is, well, not working? I would have gone down the road if I got sort of asked this question or was in this sort of position and I brought up Brexit, I'd go, then why did people not get a second vote? Because remember, Mr. Freedom of Speech here said you could have several Brexit votes, but denied people time and time again their right to a potential second vote. So once again, you get to point out that Jacob Rees-Mogg is a massive hypocrite when it comes to freedom of speech. So that's where I would have gone after him for on that. The fact that he didn't vote to give people a second referendum or give them more of a choice of what this type of Brexit that they ended up getting, because it certainly wasn't the one that the Leave campaign offered. So that's where I'd have taken this conversation. I think this Brexit argument, I think, gave him a bit too much wiggle room to try and get off. You could have really held his feet to the fire by just sort of focusing on that freedom of speech. And I think tying that freedom of speech argument to the Brexit argument goes, why didn't you give people a second referendum? Why didn't you allow people to see if this really was that they really wanted Brexit in the first place, but then what type of Brexit that they wanted? Mr. Free Speech denied that continuously. And I think that would have been a better place to take it over Brexit. And you could also call into the fact that, again, when you look at sort of opinion polls, people are regretting their decision for voting for Brexit. Should they be giving another vote on it?
I'm surprised I didn't vote for Brexit.
You think
you promised.
You think you know better than the British people?
I think you lied to people and they believed you.
I think the British people are more intelligent than that. The British people weighed up Brexit.
Are you telling me they should have known you were a liar?
I wasn't a liar.
So when you said to them,
all you're doing is mere abuse. You're not making any.
Again, he's so desperate now that he's sort of pulling out. All you're doing is mere abuse. This is why I said that I think going for an attack on him on the fact that he denied people's opportunity to have another referendum or have a different type of referendum about what type of Brexit they wanted, or even if they really did want Brexit again in the first place. Because again, this was the man who infamously said before the referendum that you should have an initial referendum and then a confirmatory referendum about 2 or 3 years later. Did we get that? No. Jacob Rees-Mogg and other people who were the key sort of big Brexiteers denied people that freedom of speech. I think that would have been, at that point, the better thing to target him on. And yet you can, of course, call him out for his lies, but how does this fit into the wider conversation? And I think it gets away from a point of what Mogg and the rest of these conservatives are trying to do is trying to throw up a big smokescreen about all this culture war stuff. That's why it's all nonsense. And Mogg does not really purport to be the big champion of freedom of speech that he claims to be. So I just think that's certainly a better avenue. And like I say, I think bringing up Brexit in the way that she has done maybe gave him a bit too wiggle. But like I say, this is a live studio environment. I understand, but like I say, I will still not say, I will still say she did a good job. But I think bringing Brexit up in the way that she does, and then again calling out abuse, that is something that she could actually turn on Jacob, because now she can say, well, whoa, how am I abusing you? And then she can do if she wanted to, she could turn and flip the tables completely on Jacob by doing all the victim blaming nonsense narrative that the right wing do. And when Jacob Rees Mogg tries to call her out for that, then she can bring up the fact that this is what the right wing do whenever they get called out for this type of nonsense as well. So again, like I said before, this is very much, hindsight criticism. This is the ability that we can pause, etc., etc. I do hope, you will forgive me for offering this criticism. But again, I think this is sort of good and sort of good opportunity to sort of have a look over these things. But like I say, I will keep on saying it. She's doing an absolutely fantastic job against Jacob Rees Mogg.
Tell me how I'm wrong. Okay, tell me I'm wrong. Let me ask you a question. When you said to people that Brexit was going to bring cheaper food,
it will.
Clothes, footwear, and drink. So it will.
All this is in progress. Joining the CTPPP, the free trade deal with Australia, the free trade deal with New Zealand, all of these are bringing in lower.
This is where you bring in the point of you could bring in, and again, this is why she shouldn't have brought in Brexit, because now Jacob Rees Mogg can trot out his all classic Brexiteer talking points. Oh, well, yes, of course it's going to bring in cheaper food. Now we've got this trade deal with Australia. Now we've got the trade deal with the Pacific Partnership. It's all cheaper food. Trust me, it's coming. It's coming. Well, Jacob Rees Mogg back in 2016 was, oh, don't worry. We do Brexit. We get cheaper food. I think at this point, this is where you would bring in the government's forecasts about how bad this stuff is in. And of course, you can obviously bring in the arguments. I'm sure Mogg would love to tackle some of these arguments, but it will be interesting to say, or what she should have said, which would have really torpedoed Mogg, was, so you want to undercut British manufacturing and British producers? Or no, you want to undercut British producers. That would have been fantastic. And then you could then tie this back in to the greater argument, because you're going to undercut British producers, which means people would lose their jobs, have to accept sort of cheaper wages, and even less regulation, which we know the British people do not want. So how on earth is your freedom of speech going to help that those British people in that situation, Jacob? And again, you see it now. All comes full circle. But yeah.
Tariffs on food coming into this country.
Ask, what do you
this is already in the pipeline.
What do you think's going to happen at the end of this year when those full Brexit checks are going to come into play?
That is very true. I am still very skeptical. I will say this now. I am highly skeptical they are going to bring in these checks. If they do, then, oh my, there is going to be a lot of chaos involved. That is for sure. But I'm still highly skeptical, because remember, when Jacob Rees Mogg was in charge, it was like 3 or 4 weeks before these checks were due to be implemented. And then all of a sudden he comes out and just says, yeah, we're not doing it, another year. And yet you've got the food industry already saying the amount of cost this is going to add to their business, which they will have to pass on. They've already openly said this. They're going to have to pass on to the consumer. So again, like I say, this is the thing when you come into these conversations. And again, if you ever find yourself going to sort of a conversation like this, you've got to be armed. You've got to be ready with your own sort of quippy, quick comebacks and your own sort of information that you've got to be able to go fight back against. And in a live studio environment, that can be pretty hectic. I will not lie, it is very, very hectic. But if it's not your area of expertise and you drag someone onto what is essentially their topic where they can start dragging out their own rhetoric, remember, at this point, he's already lost control of the conversation. But obviously, this has drifted very far off topic. And I think in this type of situation where you want to really make that point, drill down on the fact that Jacob Rees-Mogg is bringing up this whole culture war nonsense, because it is complete nonsense, and she's called him out for it, because in reality, there's all these other bigger issues which people are more concerned about. Why not? She could have called him out for a fact. Why hasn't she had someone who's an expert on like the cost of living, or going through one of the energy campaigners saying, what's going on? There is a ton of stuff she could have called him out for. And to be honest, I will say this: she did a very good job. But when you look back at hindsight and you think, oh well, you could have said this, you could have said this, could have done that. I will admit this is very hindsighty, nitpicky stuff. I will admit that up front. But there you go. So yeah, we'll continue.
Do you remember the ones this time last year you said were an act of self-harm?
Yes, I
and you
stopped
delayed
them. That's right.
They're coming in this year.
Well, there is no
What's
reason.
going to happen then?
There is no reason to bring those in. Those should be stopped again.
They're coming
and that
in.
is with it.
That's the Brexit.
The government can stop that. No, not at all. That is. If the government wishes to put those controls on, that is an act of a democratic government. Do I think they're foolish? Yes, of course I do. That's why I tried to stop them, succeeded in stopping them last year. I'm not in government, I'm a member of the Conservative Party.
That is the Brexit. Yeah,
but why is it that food inflation is higher in the EU average than it is in the UK? We're doing better than the EU.
Why don't you compare us? Because I saw the other day you compared us to Austria for inflation.
Yeah, again, this is again another sort of classic example. Oh, well, inflation is higher. Or where the average, again, it's different across the country, but across sort of Europe. But one of the things I think is fantastic, and again, because she's sort of dragged it on to the Brexit realm, there is a ton of stuff you could attack Jacob Rees-Mogg on. One of the things you could go after him for, or have absolutely advocated for, was if you bring him to Brexit, he's going to say this, this, and this. We know he's going to say this because this is his rhetoric. But if he says this, this is what you say in response to it. Because we know full well what Jacob's dialogue tree is going to be. So we know he's going to bring up the part about, inflation. Inflation, it doesn't really matter we've got high inflation because it's affecting everywhere. Except people in the UK are suffering far, far more of it, because when you look at the rest of Europe, especially sort of the more comparative countries, which again, she's making the argument for at the moment, when you look at the more comparative countries, they've got a lot higher wages than us. So while they're feeling the pinch, just as we are with inflation, they're not feeling it as much because their wages are a lot higher. And then you could pull or say, if that is the case, why are you not advocating for a rise in the minimum wage? Why are you not out there supporting those striking workers, those striking nurses, those striking doctors, and you can see where this goes. Once again, you make him look like a complete fool, you make him look like a complete hypocrite. But as I said before, this is very, very much a hindsight nitpick criticism, and I will fully sort of admit to these what I'm doing. But like I say, she did a fantastic job. And she did. I'm not saying that she did a really good job.
Great comparison there,
Which
Jacob.
is a great comparison.
Oh, wonderful. Why on
Our
earth
food
would
inflation
you-
is lower than Germany.
Why would you compare us to Austria, who have the highest inflation, one of the highest inflations in the world, and also their GDP is in the billions, ours is in the trillions. Why then would you?
Our food inflation is lower than Germany.
Why?
So actually, I'm happy to take a variety of comparisons. Why Austria? Austria is renowned for its economic caution. There's a whole school of Austrian economists who are famous for economic caution.
Why?
Oh, the Austrian School of Economics. Oh my word. You could have gone after Mogg's support of Liz Truss, and you could have pointed out that this whole Austrian School of Economics has been thoroughly debunked for years, for centuries. That Austrian economics, when it's been implemented, like Liz Truss tried to do, has not worked. And this is where you sort of know that when you bring Jacob Rees-Mogg into these arguments, because now we're no longer talking about the culture war stuff now. It's fully off it, because again, she opened that door. The second she brought in Brexit, it opened the door for Mogg. Now he can open more dialogue trees with Brexit. He can get back onto his sort of, Brexit sort of talking points. Immediately, if you said that, food prices. Well, now you bring in the fact that when you look at wages compared to the UK and Germany, Germany's are higher. So while people are, again, high inflation, it's not affecting the German public in the same way that it is affecting the UK public. Yes, it is having an effect in Germany, but it's nowhere near the amount in the UK, because our wages are considerably lower than they are in Germany.
Why don't you compare us to other comparable countries in the G7? Tell your viewers why our food costs are soaring and why they're going to continue to soar.
Our food costs are rising by less than the average for the EU and less than by Germany. So that's not too bad, is it?
No, it's going up. Why are our energy bills the highest on the planet?
Well, when I was in government, we made the biggest intervention to help people with their energy bills.
No, that's not what I'm asking. Why are they the highest on the planet?
The energy bills in the UK have gone up because of our green policies.
Oh, okay.
That has led to a very significant increase.
Nothing to do with conservative failures year after year after year.
It's nothing to do with Brexit.
Again, dragging him back onto sort of, again, the conservative failures. That's good. Certainly the green policies is laughable, because there are a ton of studies that show that if Cameron had fought off these this net zero, these anti-green conservatives at the time, we would be probably still in somewhat of an energy crisis, but it wouldn't be as bad, because we'd have all these renewables that would have certainly helped. And of course, people like Mogg, and they were all part of that campaign to sort of try and get those out and not focus on those.
No, I'm not blaming Brexit for that.
No,
actually.
absolutely nothing to do with Brexit.
But
what was I trying to do? I was trying to reduce prices by fracking, by shale gas.
Fracking. Oh, here we go.
This is where I don't know if she brings this up, but this is where you could go about bring up Jacob Rees-Mogg's interests that he has in fracking. Maybe that's why he's so interested in fracking, because, well, if he opens fracking, he would then benefit financially from these things. So it's not just sort of the green arguments that can say why fracking is bad. There's a ton of sort of should we say Mogg's sort of financial ties to a lot of these sort of fracking companies. So probably something he should bring up. Could have brought up during this, but like I say,
Go again. Here we go.
Using our resources.
Fracking. Do you want to tell people how long it would take to get any sort of benefit from fracking, and how teeny tiny that benefit would be, and the fact that it would do absolutely nothing?
We're potentially sitting on trillions of cubic feet of gas underneath us. There are very good geological studies showing this.
Do you genuinely believe? Do you believe your lies?
All you say when you disagree is that somebody is lying. But this isn't a proper political argument.
You've been proven time and time again. And you never say, do you know what? I'm really sorry. I told you that everything was going to be better and cheaper, and it's not.
You disagree with me, but that's not the same as somebody lying. Disagreement is perfect.
Okay. if you ever get to the stage in your conversation where someone goes, "Oh yeah, you're just accusing me of lying. You're not engaging in a proper political debate." We rewind, go back to the last point where you showed this person was lying, and fracking again, big whole argument, and again opens up his dialogue tree where he can now go down all these arguments of, "Oh, we're sitting on thousands of, you know, things of gas that we're not using." Well, there's a ton of coal in the ground that we're not using as well. So what? There's all the oil fields in and around sort of in the North Sea that we're not using. You can make that argument about any sort of energy. The point is that if you do any of this, first of all, it's going to take a long time for any benefits to sort of materialize. That is something you noticed he's dodged. And like I say, in a live studio environment, trying to pick up on those tells, things that they're dodging, things that they're sort of being cagey about, can be sometimes hard to pick up on. But if you do pick up on the fact that she asked that question, completely tried to circumnavigate it, that's what I would have gone back to. But again, in a live studio environment, I will say this: it is very high pressure. It can be very, very intimidating. And to be honest, she's doing a fantastic job in what she's doing. But I just want to sort of reiterate that in that situation, not everyone will be able to give this good a performance. And to be honest, she went in prepared. But my main criticism was you went and focused on sort of freedom of speech, making him look like a complete fool, focusing on freedom of speech when there's all these sort of failures. You then opened up the door to Brexit. You did sort of hold him to account, especially on the checks and how chaotic and disastrous those checks are going to be. And then you open the door to fracking. And again, it sort of gives him more avenues to sort of talk about, to where he can sort of start to deploy his dialogue trees. And then you've got to sort of try and sort of, go back against those, fight back against those points. And it's, especially in a segment like this, you've got to sort of really hold someone down and drill their feet to the fire. And she is doing that. But by opening these more doors, the more chances he has to sort of run away into sort of other dialogue trees. And so now he's gotten to the point where, this is just, you're just accusing me of lying. This isn't a political debate. This is what people like you do all the time.
Reasonable.
Sorry, if you promise something, it doesn't materialize, that's a lie.
What I promised about tariffs on food is true. They are being reduced with the free trade agreements that we've been negotiating.
Should we revisit that
really
at the end of this year when your act of self-harm comes into play?
Well, that would be madness if the government does that, and I shall oppose that very strongly.
Okay, let's go.
So,
why don't we?
Why would the government?
Let's go back to woke, right? Because we want to talk about woke culture wars. I read.
Yeah, that would have been fun to sort of go back on him, like reduce tariffs. A lot of these things, again, you go back to the fact that it's going to damage British producers. You could easily bring up the fact that, as I'm sure she would probably maybe know or even look into, his, should we say, the local farmers in Somerset are probably not too happy about Mogg being signing all these free trade deals, which would undercut their own produce and prices. Again, something well worth pointing out. But again, sort of going back to sort of the culture wars. But yeah, she's dragged Mogg over. Sorry, it's free speech. He's dragged her. She has dragged him over Brexit. She's gotten to the fact on all these sort of the sort of the nonsense, the sort of the green energy stuff, and sort of we're now back to woke. Yeah, like I say, Mogg lost control of this interview completely, 100%. I think Purkiss was in control at about sort of 3 or 4 minutes into it, and he lost control. He's had nothing really substantial back to say to it, except sort of accusing her of being sort of aggressive, and he's had no comeback really to what she's been saying. And I think maybe her sort of trying to get the audience to sort of recognize that, because you've got to think, when you're in this sort of this situation, there is the invisible audience. There's you and the interviewer, and then there's the audience who you cannot see. So in these conversations, you've got to sort of try and bring in the audience constantly. Make sure they're in the audience, bring them in, find that they're in it. TV repetition works incredibly well. So I'm really glad that, especially when they're bringing up the fact of, he's bringing up all these factors of this and this and this, and she's bringing up going, well, actually, that really doesn't care. That's not going to help people's lives or improve them. So that was a constant good repetition. And Mogg was coming to, but freedom of speech is really important. Well, okay, why are you not bringing on someone who is a campaigner for like cost of living or anything like that? That would have been an interesting thing to see what Mogg's response to that would have been, and they have had maybe after this an interview with someone who was a sort of cost of living campaigner, or someone who's sort of campaigning about sort of the energy sort of situation. Would have been interesting to see how Mogg would have fared in those conversations.
Your fascinating article with Frost in the Telegraph. That's a great person to partner with, by the way.
It is. He's a very great man, very distinguished figure. Responsible, wise, good.
Shoddy deal that now no one likes, by the way. No one's happy with this.
No, he did.
So well done. Great partner.
He got out of the European Union. He did a good negotiation with the EU.
Literally no one is happy with this. Brexiteers are not happy with this deal.
Well, I don't think that's right. Okay. I think the Brexiteers are very happy that we're out of the European Union. In this article,
you talked about how anti-woke policies are going to help recover the country. Why it needs recovering, right? Your guess is as good as mine. Now, how are your anti-woke policies going to help restore the economy, for example? Explain it.
Well, we want supply-side reform. We want the economy to get to...
And this is good. This is something I always say. Whenever you get this and they talk about, supply-side reform. What do you mean by supply-side reform? This is good, because you don't very often sort of see this. And I'm really glad that she's going after this.
The higher levels of growth.
And
this is really important.
That.
We don't want people distracted
by
all
We've
the
got
wokeness.
Only a small amount of time.
Well, as we were discussing earlier, the £140,000, small amount of money in itself, being wasted by the Cabinet Office. That's part of the point.
140.
Yeah, but
sorry,
simply,
we're talking about fixing the economy, and you've just quoted 140,000.
I'm talking about things that are symptomatic of the problems of the waste
can I explain to your
within
viewers,
the government.
When Jacob talks about deregulation, that's a big thing. You're all about deregulation. What Jacob is talking about is scaling back your workers' rights and consumer rights.
I'm afraid we're going to have to draw this to a conclusion, but you're wrong on that.
Yeah, that is such a shame, isn't it? Really convenient. Cutting them off there. You can even see Mogg's face look of delight. Thank God this is over.
Because our employment rights all predate the European Union.
Guy didn't even want minimum.
Bear in mind, no, these not only do these, there are some employment rights that do predate the European Union, but what about all those that came in during when we were in the European Union? There are a ton of rules and regulations that Mogg would love to get rid of because they came in pre that. And even then, he wants to get rid of them. But, don't worry, we'll keep the UK ones that were like, relevant back in the 80s. Actually, no, if you want to sort of predate joining the EU, does he mean back in like the 60s? Those workers' rights? I'm sure people would love to just roll back the clock for workers' rights all the way back to the 60s.
By and large.
2011.
But unfortunately, we've got to go straight to the weather. We've overrun. But the sun will no doubt be shining in Somerset, and it'll be a special.
I know they turned the mic off, but you can't hear what she had to say there. But yeah, she did an absolutely fantastic job holding Mogg's feet to the fire there. Absolutely well done. Bravo to Purkiss. She did a fantastic job. Like I say, these are only sort of, they are sort of criticisms. They are sort of, nitpicky ones about sort of strategy. Maybe she'd have gone this direction. Maybe she'd have done this. But overall, she did an absolutely fantastic job. And it was absolutely wonderful to see Mogg get absolutely, well, taken to the cleaners. Certainly having a good cry with Nanny afterwards in the green room, that's for sure. But like I say, let me know what you thought down to some of these down below. What do you think to some of the stuff that I had to say? Do you think I was right and wrong in some of these? Like I say, I'm always sort of very interested to know and sort of have those conversations. But as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.